Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another episode review from the Goosebumps The Vanishing TV show. We're going to look at episode 5, The Boy Who Cried Monster. So, when I saw that this title was the name of the episode for episode 5, I was like, okay, they're doing a spin on The Girl Who Cried Monster from the original 62. And I was curious to see what would become of that. I saw that CJ was hinted to be the main character of the episode in the synopsis on, I think, IMDb or some other website like Rotten Tomatoes. And I was like, all right, let's see what they do with The Girl Who Cried Monster. And I have to say that out of all the episodes I've watched from this 2023 iteration of Goosebumps, this episode by far feels the most Goosebumps-like. Possibly next to the Haunted Mask episode from season 1. And that's saying a lot. And this one has a lot of callbacks to The Girl Who Cried Monster. Maybe not in the way that you would think, but it's kind of there. And I have to say that this episode was definitely one of the more memorable episodes from this season for me. Especially after watching episodes 3 and 4, like the Haunted Car and the Monster Blood episode, which was kind of rough at times. This one was more fun and in spirit of the books. And I think the charm that I felt reading Goosebumps books as a kid and what have you, watching the 90s show, is kind of here more so than the rest of the series. Because at this point of me making this review for this episode, I've seen the whole show. And I have a lot to unpack with these further episode reviews, and then, of course, my full season review at the very end of it. But we'll get to there when we get there. So, I'm going to say this like I've been saying in all my episode reviews. I get that there's a lot of people out there that want this show to fail because they don't support Sony and Disney making a Goosebumps show, especially in the fashion that they're making it in, because they don't think that it's real Goosebumps to them. I get your side of the argument for the most part, but I'm trying to judge the material as is. I'm not going to be a person just bashing this show just because it's made by the people or what have you. I'm judging the material, not necessarily people behind it, right? So if you are in that camp and you're frustrated with me, you can leave a comment on the video. I'll drop you a like and a heart and move on with my day, because I just don't have time to deal with that crap. So yeah, now that you know that, let's get into the episode here. So, The Boy Who Cried Monster. What is it about? So, in the beginning of the episode, we get caught up to speed on the cliffhanger of episode 4, which was Monster Blood, where we saw Devin, Frankie, and Cece noticing that Dr. Brewer was down below in the military bunker that the kids went to on their own accord at the very end of the episode. So we get caught up to speed of what Dr. Brewer was doing down there. And perhaps we get to see a glimpse of Dr. Brewer messing around with this electrical panel that we saw Devin messing with in episode 1. And him having his own interaction with the latch in the bottom of the floor. And this black mist substance coming out and affecting him in some capacity. And then once the credits kick on, we get caught up to speed to present day. Again, present time in the episode, I should say. And Dr. Brewer has fallen ill. He is not feeling good. He has like a cold, like an upper respiratory infection or whatnot. And his kids pretty much could care less about staying home to help him feel better. Since the events of the last episode, I think Devin is even more so up this girl Frankie's butt. And of course, Cece has some other plans that she's involved with, right? So Dr. Brewer is left home alone, and while the kids go out and enjoy their excursions or what have you. And let's just say we get introduced to CJ, who's out making deliveries that day, and we get more of a CJ-centered story here, where we get more of an insight of his family's restaurant business and how his mom has trusted the fate of the delivery side of the business into the hands of CJ. And CJ even starts out with like a a story that's pretty much considered a fake out. because he's telling this little girl about this old lady that he was delivering to that might be in a haunted house, and his mom scolds him for it, right? But anyway, once that stuff is done, CJ gets a call to go over to Dr. Brewer's house, who's ordered, I think, of chicken soup to make him feel better. And once CJ brings the delivery to Dr. Brewer, he witnesses a horrifying thing that happens, right? And Dr. Brewer, when he sneezes, there's a laughable CGI effect here, and this is where the CGI in the show starts to become like noticeably cringe at times. The eyeball's just drooping out of the socket, right? Falling down the face. And CJ, of course, freaks out and runs away and doesn't collect any money for the soup that Dr. Brewer owes him. And he heads back to his mom's restaurant and tells her, look, something's wrong with Dr. Brewer. I saw his eye. It was bulging out. Look, we have to go back and check on him, right? But when they go back to check on Dr. Brewer, he seems fine. He seems fine and dandy and nothing out of the ordinary, right? But Dr. Brewer pays the mom and pays CJ for his time. And once the two have a conversation, once Dr. Brewer heads back into his home, his mom essentially fires him for being a delivery boy, even though early on CJ pleaded with her to make him a manager and that he shouldn't be a delivery driver because that's not his real calling, right? But anyways, the two of them head back to the restaurant to, I guess spend the rest of the day there. While at the restaurant, CJ gets a phone call from Dr. Brewer saying, I don't know what happened, but look, if you come back, I need your help with something. And, I'll make it worthwhile. I hope you get your job back. I'll tell your mom what happened, blah, 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 blah. So CJ's like, okay, cool. That's fine with me. And when he goes back to Dr. Brewer's house, Dr. Brewer essentially is like, hey, what are you doing here? And CJ's like, well, you called me to come here. And then, of course, there's a twist involved, implying that Dr. Brewer maybe isn't who he really is anymore. And he ends up snatching CJ, and we get caught up to speed later on what's going to happen to him. But meanwhile, we get caught up with Trey, and Trey has now, gotten out of this state that he was in, and he's out of the hospital, and he's met up with Frankie at his house to kind of talk about some things, and him and Frankie, I guess, get back together. I don't know why, but I guess they do here. And for Devin, he, I guess, catches wind that Frankie might be busy with Trey, so he goes off to the park, I guess, to, do some soul searching, and he ends up finding this random girl named Hannah. And Hannah is a brand new character, and he's talking with her and feels like he really knows her, and he ends up getting a call, I think, from his sister or Frankie, I forget who calls him. And this distracts him to the point where he looks away from her, but when he looks back, she's gone. But the two of them were talking about the military bunker and how she can sense that he was there before, and he's kind of perplexed as to how she might know that information. And she drops this hint that the bunker is known as Camp Nightmare, right? So, as you can tell, there's probably some more to that story that we find out later on. But Devin, when he sees that Hannah just up and disappears from behind him, decides to meet up with his other friends who notice that something might be wrong with CJ because they haven't heard from him, right? And to make matters weirder, when we get caught up with CJ has been tied up down in the basement, and Dr. Brewer is essentially, trying to get him to drink this blood that he vomits up and says, hey, it's going to make you feel better, blah, 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 blah. And CJ's like, yeah, I'm not going to drink that. And he tries to push Dr. Brewer's hand away. There's a nasty finger bending thing that happens that's really gross, and Dr. Brewer has to snap it back in place. And then, of course, he gets a phone call, I think from Detective Diaz. That might be a little distracting here, but it's kind of a thing, right? Where this kind of buys CJ some more time. And once, Dr. Brewer gets the call and he goes upstairs and meets up with Detective Diaz, it turns out that she has a VHS tape that she's going to leave behind with him to maybe help him with this search for what happened to his brother back in '94. And Dr. Brewer is upset because we get to see Diaz, who is kind of revealed not to really have a sibling that went missing in 94, more so than she used to date possibly Brewer's brother. And we find that out in the next episode, which is mostly a found footage story, and we get caught up to speed on that whole backstory there. But yeah, she goes behind this bridge underpass and pulls out some rocks and pulls out this VHS tape that plays a role later on, right? But anyways, once that happens and Diaz is taken out of the situation, Diaz's daughter, who is Alex in the story, realizes that what's going on with the kids is just going to get her in more trouble, and she kind of swears off about helping them anymore. But once CJ comes back into the fold later on in the episode, we see that she's going to go help the kids try to play what they end up finding is on this VHS tape. But before they get to that point, the friends realize that something might be off with the whereabouts of CJ when they go asking around and kind of putting context clues. And this is also the episode where the story starts to kick in high gear because Frankie, Cece, Trey, and even Devin are kind of coming together on some ideas of what can be going on with this whole mystery going back to the bunker, and perhaps this mystery figure involved with the story, and this black goop substance, and what that perhaps means for this connection that they've all been kind of sharing with the substance, for the people who've made contact with it, I should say. And they end up going back to the house to maybe look in the basement some more, but they end up stumbling across a grisly scene of CJ being abducted by Dr. Brewer, and Dr. Brewer ends up getting something swung at his head, and it pretty much does something really grisly to his body. And this freaks out the kids, and they run out of the basement and leave Dr. Brewer behind. But near the very end of the story, we get a glimpse that somebody that we saw in episode 4, and it's implied to be the gray-haired woman who was the doctor, is in the basement collecting evidence. And Dr. Brewer is shocked about who he thinks he sees, right? And this also plays a role in the opening of the next episode moving forward. But that's really all you ever get out of this episode here, and that's all you really need to know. But nonetheless, that's basically The Boy Who Cried Monster in a nutshell. So yeah, this is another one of those episodes that kind of feel like side quests, but this one is a side quest mixed with some necessary information that you need to know moving forward in the story. So this episode kind of gets out of the rut of filler and becomes more about the core story again. And that really did help me with this episode. I think a lot of the problems that this show has as a whole, even going back to season 1, is that they want to have this big ensemble cast that shows a wide different variety of characters and representation of people. And they feel obligated to have to do these solo episodes characterizing them. And ultimately, the characterizing stuff that we get and the side quest monsters that we see end up mattering nothing in the end. Especially what you'll see by the end of this season here. A lot of the sloppiness from season 1 in terms of that is prevalent here. But I will say again, the sloppiness is helped a little bit by the characters, the performances, and the pacing of the episodes being a little better most of the time. And this episode was kind of fun, being a more grounded episode with CJ, going into the You Gotta Believe Me story that was The Girl Who Cried Monsters book. This has a lot of notes of You Gotta Believe Me in it, and that if that trope annoys you, I don't blame you, it annoys me too, and it did kind of get in the way of me enjoying this one. But because this one is more of an homage to The Girl Who Cried Monster, I was able to kind of overlook certain things about it, but it ain't something that you haven't seen done before. Until you get to the violent stuff with the body, specifically with Brewer. But that's all I'll leave it at. But yeah, this one tickled at my heartstrings a little more because I had more of that kids' horror element than the previous episodes. And more true to the book it is trying to emulate than others. I will say this one, getting back into the meat of the story, we find a lot of necessary information in the story. about the gray-haired woman and perhaps her role near the end of it. This keeps the intrigue moving on to the next episode, and I was really excited for that. We see more random abilities of the goo, because why not? At this point, the goo has 50 different abilities going on in this show, and it's hard to really focus in on what this thing actually is, but you really don't find out what it is until episode 7, so strap in. But anyways, what they did with the goo here, with the infecting Dr. Brewer and turning him into, like, essentially a science experiment freak, kind of like The Thing from Another World, or maybe Jeff Goldblum's The Fly, in a crappy CGI version of it, which definitely holds this episode back at times. The CGI in this episode is noticeably horrid, but I do like the direction there, and at least what the attempt was, but yeah, it's not the greatest thing ever in terms of effects, and you would think that the show would put more money into that, but I digress. Moving on from that, the relationship stuff is more prevalent here again. You have the Frankie and Trey getting back together side plot going on that carries over into the next episode too. And there's some backstory that Trey doesn't know about that, he gets upset over when he finds out the information of, like, Frankie dropping a car on something that she thought was actually him. This kind of tore him up inside. You could tell that Trey is more insecure than he lets on to be. But that's all you really get out of his character there. And him and Frankie getting back together over what's happened seems rather rash and sudden, and almost puts a complete stop on this ship that these episodes have desperately trying to been being built for Frankie and Devin's romantic connection. I just feel like this direction in this show, in terms of that relationship, was a big mishandle, and I didn't like that aspect of it. And it doesn't really need to be in the episode to begin with, but it's there. There's some more cringe dialogue and running gags of the bus-in line, like Cece brings this up again to Devin when they're in the coffee shop talking with Frankie and comparing notes about what they observed in the phenomenon so far, and that was pretty cringe. So yeah, take that for what you will. Cringe dialogue can be here at times. The music is also still pretty cringy as usual. And to be honest, one last little jab I could throw at this episode is that I will say that there's a cliffhanger that I think episode 6 picks up on rather quickly, but that stuff I felt like could have been just the focal point of the story, and having CJ's involvement in this just felt like a completely unnecessary thing to do, because you could have picked any other character that's already been involved in the story to kind of help expedite the pace, like perhaps Cece or even Devin, to make the situation even more messed up and actually scary, because they're dealing with their own dad, kind of like the Stay Out of the Basement book. But I digress. We pick CJ because it's his episode to give the stage to. So, it is what it is, but the good stuff here does kind of help it. The acting is good as usual. I do like the direction the show is going at this point. It's starting to turn more into what it becomes in the final episodes here. The mystery with Dr. Brewer and the black substance is starting to kick on again. We're getting out of the rut of the filler stuff, which I can appreciate. And to be honest, for this one being one of the longer episodes of the season, I think if not the longest or second longest, this one felt like a breeze to watch. It didn't have too many dull moments. Like I said, there are some detours in the core story here, like most of the other episodes, but this one had a decent pace to it, and that side stuff is kind of pushed to the side rather quickly, so I can appreciate that. And to be honest, there's some shocking scenes and imagery that really stick with me, like the whole thing with Brewer's body near like the final 10 minutes of the episode was great. There's some funny humor with CJ, and I like his relationship with his mom. It made me laugh and chuckle a little bit. we get some more insight on the quirks of his character. And to be honest, I'm going to say this up front. The stuff about what Brewer experienced down in the containment area was kind of cool, and I thought that was pretty scary, in my opinion, because it was in pitch black, and he's trying desperately to turn the switch off, and he cuts his suit open, and the realization of that stuff hit me a little bit, because I'm like, oh, dude, because at that point, you have no idea what's going to happen to him, and Brewer, you can kind of tell, is like, oh, crap, I'm screwed. It's almost like getting a death sentence, and I thought that was a pretty cool direction, even though I think they mildly dropped the ball on that, as you'll see in the next episode and even moving forward. I liked it at the time I watched it, and I still think that was a good direction choice to help keep the steam of the season going. So overall, I don't really have much else to say. Typical ailments, the same old stuff. I feel like I'm a broken record going on with this show. But this one was a decent watch. You know, it wasn't bad, it wasn't great or anything. It was just kind of middle of the road, but pushing that decent side of things. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, because I don't put kitty gloves on with this show, and because I actually rate it like a young adult property without giving it a 1-point curve, I'd probably give this episode maybe like a 3 out of 5 stars. It's a low decent thing, but I think it's a definite step up from the previous 2 episodes and starting to click on to the main story. And honestly, given it all, I can actually say this wholeheartedly. At this point of the show, I realized that you don't need 10 episodes or even 8 episodes to do this type of show format if they continue on with the season 3. If anything, this show kind of proves that you can knock this stuff out in 6 episodes and not spend so much focus on filler and actually build onto the budget where it counts. As you'll see later in the season, I think a lot of people are going to be really disappointed with that last episode, given all this build-up for kind of a lackluster final act of the whole show, for this season at least. But this episode kind of opened my eyes that you don't even need 8 episodes, which is already an improvement on pace from season 1. They can continuously improve pace by cutting even 2 more. And this episode proves that to me. But anyways, that's just my thoughts on The Boy Who Cried Monster. Let me know down in the comment section if you watched this episode. Did you enjoy it? Did you love it or hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.